Hey, spiritual extremists, it's Dr. Lloyd-Moffett inside the box. Filbert is making a little cameo here because it's raining outside. And we're going to talk about why you might want to seek out solitude, why you might want to flee from the world. And after talking with many people who live away from the world, here's one of the main things they mention. They mention that the world is just full of useless distractions. I mean, it's like an entire industry exists merely to fill our mind with things that don't matter. I mean, college students know way too much about the Kardashians or the Bachelor, Bachelorette. I mean, do we really need to know what happened in the windmill? Come on. Really? No. And I find this particularly true even of music. I mean, I don't know why, but I can still sing my Posse on Broadway, which I learned in like seventh grade, from start to finish. Why? Why is my mind filled with those things? Because they're horrible. They're horrible influences on us, but we tend to fill our mind with things of the world. And as a result, our mind tends to get crowded. One of the first times I realized this, I was at Dharamshala, where the Dalai Lama lives, and one of the lamas was giving a talk to maybe 1,000 people, and he said, "I want everybody just to close their eyes and try to have no thoughts for just 10 seconds. Just have no thoughts, not even the thought of having no thought." So he closed our eyes. He took the time, and then at the end of 10 seconds, he asked, was anybody able to do that? Was anybody able to empty their mind for even 10 seconds? These two young Americans raised their hand. And he goes, we know who the liars are in the group. Because it's so hard to empty our mind. It's like all these ideas, all these thoughts just operate like ping pong inside of our mind. And we can never just stop. We have such a hard time stopping. Now that you have spent 3 hours in solitude, I have to tell you that I've had a number of students over the years who just couldn't do it. They were like, I just don't want to try to have no thoughts. It's just such a scary notion for them. And the reason why I do 3 hours, now that you've done it, and I can let you in on the secret, is because I think most people distract themselves for about 2.5 hours, and it's usually the last half hour or so where you finally can get to a spot where your mind is emptied. And I think in some ways it's even worse than it used to be. Because it used to be that you had times where you had sort of mandatory silence. I mean, think of times of like walking in the woods or even walking in your neighborhood before cell phones. There was just no way that you could be disturbed. I know the story of the boy's great grandfather. He was a famous hiker and famously quiet. And one time he went on an 18-mile hike with his wife all day long. But after 8 hours, he had yet to say a word to her. He was a very quiet Englishman. And Gemma turned to him and said, Peter, if you do not say something to me, I am going home. And Peter apparently turned to her and said, yeah, she said, I'm going home and I'm taking a taxi. And apparently he turned to her and said, Nora, there are no taxis here. And then kept walking. Because it used to be when you went on a hike, there was just no way to bring noise with you. But now, when the boys and I go on a hike, you hear people with music, you hear people talking on their phones. I mean, it's something that you can really take with you. And I noticed that recently, I borrowed a tractor from a neighbor, and the neighbor's a few miles away. And so I decided just to take it on the road to my house. And its top speed was like 7 miles an hour. And so this couple of miles took about 40 minutes. And what I noticed is that it's one of the few times in my life where it's just completely silent. Because normally when I get in the car, I turn on the radio or I call my parents or something like that. But here was just some forced silence. And I think that's so typical of today, that we just have such rare moments of that. And so we just know so much information and it fills our mind. And it's not all bad stuff. I mean, take for granted how much we know. If you know high school algebra, you know more math than anyone in the ancient world. And most of us did take algebra, right? We just have this sort of knowledge that has come over the time. I also think that we have higher expectations of multitasking now. It just seems like high school students and college students are encouraged to be involved in so many different activities now, all the time. It used to be you studied, you occasionally went to a party, you go to the door, you go to the dining hall, but now all of you involved in so many different activities so much of the time. And so it just seems like our mind is filled with more and more distractions. Now, what's the problem with distractions? Well, distractions end up allowing us never to see the world as it is. One of the tricks of parenting is that when your child starts to focus on something that you know is going to end up in tears, you just distract them. I remember when Finney was a little kid and he would get upset, if his brother did something or something. I'd say, Finney, is that a dinosaur outside? He'd be like, what, dinosaur? Oh, okay. It even works with dogs all the time. I can just be like, Filbert, what's over there? Filbert, look over there. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, he's got to go get it. See, distraction works so well. And this is how it works religiously. Because what distraction does is it allows you not to see the world as it is. And when you're alone, you're sort of whittled down to your own existence. I think this is what Thomas Merton is getting at in The Climate of Monastic Prayer, where he says the monk confronts his own humanity and that of his world at the deepest and most central point where the void seems to open up into black despair. The monk confronts this serious possibility and rejects it as a Camusian man confronts the absurd and transcends it by his freedom. The option of absolute despair is turned into perfect hope by the pure and humble supplication of monastic prayer. The monk faces the worst and discovers in it the hope of the best. From the darkness comes light, from death life. From the abyss there comes unaccountably the mysterious gift of spirit sent by God to make all things neat, to transform the created and redeemed world into reestablishing all things in Christ. What does he say? He's saying solitude teaches us how the world is. And I think this is, in your reading, what the story of the Muslim ascetics is, Hai and Absol. Because in the story, you've got two extremes. You've got the person who knows religion and the person who's never ever heard of traditional religion. And the author brilliantly sets up this thought experiment. Do you need to know the traditional religion in order to find God? And oddly, Absol, the one who knows Islam, is more isolationist, and it's Hai who seeks after Absol, who wants to find out from him. And when Absol teaches Hai Islam, the religion of the prophets, what does he say? Listen to him. It says, Hai then asked him about himself and his life, and Absol accordingly set out to tell him about the island and the people who lived there. He described how they lived before the advent of their present religion and how they acted. He related all the traditional religious traditions describing the divine world, heaven and hell, rebirth and resurrection, the gathering and reckoning, the scales of justice straightway. Hai understood all this and found none of it in contradiction with what he had seen for himself in this supernal vantage point. He recognized that whoever offered this description had given a faithful picture and spoken truly. The man must have been a messenger sent by the Lord, quote unquote. Hai believed in the message and the truth of what he said. He bore witness to his mission as apostle of God. And so what is he trying to say? That Hai discovers the true religion and had discovered the true religion in solitude. And Absol is just showing him and giving a new framework for something he had already discovered. Because the point of the story is, in the end, you can discover God or the goal of religion merely by living in solitude. That is what all you need. And you find this also in other traditions, especially like in Buddhism, where they talk about just being present and the importance of being in the present moment at all times. This is something that distractions keep us from living in the present. And what Buddhism says is you can't live in reality unless you're here. But if your mind is constantly filled with things, you won't be in the present. So almost all the ascetic traditions say that the world tends to fill your mind with distractions. And with a mind filled with useless information, tantalizing ideas, and a whole bunch of things from the world, you never see the world as it really is. You'll never discover your spiritual purpose unless you separate out from all those useless distractions.